Hello, and welcome to Tales and Tactics. This is our podcast where we talk about games, tabletop games, role-playing games, miniature war games. Today is a do-it-yourself episode where we've received a submission from one of our listeners for a game they have lovingly published, designed, and brought forward to you, our listeners and fans. We are very excited this week to talk about the Consortium. This is a fantasy skirmish miniatures game. This game, the tagline that they themselves provide to us is, "Your world, your minis, but our rules." This is written by Brandy and Julio Santiago, and we've been really lucky to get a chance to play this and get a little bit deeper in on this game.
So yeah, we had some fun messing around with this and digging into it. It's a dense volume for a home brewed game.
100%. It's over 170 pages.
Yeah. It's full of all kinds of stuff. And it's overall, I'd say it's quite well produced.
I agree. There's a lot to grab onto here. There is a fully integrated setting if you're interested in playing in their world. There are tons of tables for scenarios, missions, and encounters, as well as robust tools for making any type of hero, hireling, monster, or great evil monster that you could think of.
But before we get into all that, all right, Troy, what would you describe this game as from the broadest sense?
So it's a fantasy skirmish miniatures war game. However, that's misleading because what it actually serves to do is to be an RPG campaign that you play as a predominantly tactical miniature skirmish game. So if you look at the time spent playing a role-playing game, a lot of that time is in the conversational, sort of ephemeral role-play state before you enter a tactical encounter. In this game, it's inverted. Your relationship between those two states is different because your role-play time is more the after session, 10 to 15 minutes of characters interacting, and then you would move on to another set encounter determined by either a game master character figure, the other player at the table. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you could also roll for it depending on the type of mission you're interested in doing. So in many ways, you're moving about your fantasy characters and fighting another group of fantasy characters with a relatively modest number of figures on the table, probably 5 to 15 per side at a max. However, it's more for a narrative role-play outcome than it is to be played competitively or for a win-loss state. It's a lot about the lives, the trials and tribulations of these characters that you create, because as this game is designed, you will be making every profile. There is a bestiary available online for free on Wargames Vault as well that has stat lines in there. So there's lots of examples. However, you will be making your characters. And when you make them, there's that personal touch you're applying. And then you're going to see their fate as you play through these related, interconnected games. And that's really where the narrative and really where the strength of this game comes out, is creating these interesting characters, assigning to them their traits, their flaws, giving them equipment, and seeing their progression. Now, this game also has the ability to be played as just a raw skirmish game if you were interested in doing so. But it is really oriented around a persistent skirmish adventure campaign. 5 Leagues from the Borderlands comes to mind as another game that's similar, but where that is more prescriptive, where you're going to end up with all the tables that it has. This title, The Consortium, is a little more freeform in the way that you would mold and apply the scenario to your party and come up with your next scenario, even if you do roll for it.
That may or may not be to people's taste in the sense that it's that open-ended.
True.
But you can always set those objectives by yourself. But I think the interesting thing in comparing it to, say, the 5 Somethings from Somewhere style is that those are very much tailored around a kind of objective.
Yes.
Which is getting to a particular place in a and so it allows for the game to focus on that, but I've never felt that is 100% necessary. You can have the game that just keeps going until you get tired of it or the game you lose.
Exactly. And I guess another way I'll point out why this one is different, the Consortium, than other adventure-style games, is it has solo capabilities, and it walks you through their proposed approach for solo play. However, The standard mode of play is called party mode, where one player plays an RPG party in its entirety. You play all the characters and the hirelings, but it's just you. And then you're against a GM, an opposing player who's piloting the monsters and the traps and the environment. And they're sort of like your dungeon master relative to you as the player characters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the standard mode, what they originally developed. Hero mode is where you have multiple player characters, each governed by a different human being. And they would play as these people. The hirelings then belong to each individual character as opposed to being party hirelings in that sense. And it would be Max and I each have a character and a couple of hirelings. And then Jay would be our game master, for example. And we would work together to fight that. And then the third option of play is just me, myself, my warband, my party, versus myself piloting the opposition to the best of my ability, making the most logical, efficient, or role-play-ishly delightful choices that I can in the different moments.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just classic solo, essentially.
Yeah, there's no AI rules, which to some people might feel like that's not a solo game then, but I don't like AI rules in 9 out of 10 solo games anyways, so it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it depends on how they're done. I tend to like a tighter solo, but we'll save that for a different topic.
The interesting thing about this game is that it's a big one. There's a lot of content in here. So Brandy and Julio have written a full setting. It's an interesting setting. It's a little different than many other fantasy settings. How it works is it's a new world. So the old nations, or the older nations as they describe them, have sailed to this new landmass, this new continental region. And now they're trying to establish effectively colonies. But this landmass is very dangerous. So this effort is met with all types of calamity. And it kind of feels, like Max had pointed out, like almost conquistadorial in a sense. So there's an interesting tone that might not suit the flavor and taste of everyone. And I wanted to be upfront about that because not everyone sees that in the same light. So that's something that's worth investigation in your own taste, but it does bring a very different angle to your typical fantasy because it's transporting it to a different locale with different considerations than simply like, this is a medieval Europe, for example.
I guess the positive it has for it is that it's more refreshing in that sense. I would also say that there's a lot of things going on thematically. I think some work better than others, but I think the horror aspect that sometimes gets woven in does make for a more palatable or more suitable backdrop to that particular style of setting.
Yes.
Because it adds a kind of bleakness that doesn't glorify any of that stuff, but it still makes it interesting and playable. And one of my critiques is I wish they had leaned more into that consistently as a tone. We'll get into the writing style and the tone later.
Well, maybe we should do that now, actually. Before we get mechanics, we can talk about the book because it is about, it's over 170 pages, so there's lots of content to go over. There are tables, character creation, inventory, equipment. You don't find stat lines or profiles unless you get those alternatively for free on Wargame Vault. So it's not like they're hard to get, but you'll have to source those, or you just make them all up yourself. But that would be how that works. And the book itself is 2-column, very simple style, white background, easy to read in that sense. Max, what would you comment on the art?
Well, just a last point. So yeah, it alternates with the layout, it alternates between some single column, some double. Sometimes the margins are shifted from one side to the other. And it actually adds a lot of visual dynamic that makes it really easy to read. I did not, aside from the density of the material, I didn't have a difficult time finding stuff. It's actually a very professional layout. And I think they did a great job on that aspect of it.
I agree. Yeah.
So your eyes aren't getting tired or bored. They use a lot of images to break up space. One critique I have about the art, and it's, again, you're dealing with, this is like, we're talking DIY stuff. I mean, it is a published thing, but it's obviously a small team. We're talking about indie development here. But I would have liked more of a focus on consistency with the art. I find the art quality and the vibe to be, it varies a little too much for me. Some pieces are amazing. In fact, a lot of the small pieces, there's a great one with a rat on top of a skull that look great. And I mean, obviously the creator will know the artists. But then some of it is too loose, too cartoony, too jokey. And I ran into a lot of the similar issues with the writing. I couldn't quite place what the tone was compared to the themes. Because the themes, I mean, they're supposed to be open-ended. Like, you can make this whatever you want. But if I'm following the world for what it is, it alternates between being very grim and serious and gritty and being weirdly comical, makes a lot of like popular cultural references.
Yes.
Kind of weird jokes. And I'm not saying those things can't go well together, but that is doing that, mixing horror and humor in that way with those specifics is not an easy thing to pull off. There's no blame being put about that, but I had a hard time getting the feeling, the mood from the game because the tone shifted both visually and in its writing quite a lot. So if I had any immediate criticism, and honestly, this is about the extent of what I had an issue with, it's just that it should feel more consistent. It's missing a kind of tightness in its themes and its tone.
And that's interesting because I feel like the tightness is absolutely present mechanically in the way the game like plays and handles and the thoughtfulness of the dice interactions, like we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But I do agree, that it's hard to understand the tone that I'm taking away. And maybe it's on purpose to allow for us to take away different tones for our own nature of our table. But it does feel like there is an inherent balance point to the setting, and then the tone doesn't land or lock that in, kind of dances around it at times. So I have a harder time understanding how I'm to visualize the action in my mind's eye as I play our game.
There's a bit of a lack of cohesion in the fluff.
Now, what I really like about it is the action dice system. This is the core inherent mechanic of the game. Now, I'm going to draw a comparison here. I don't even know if these designers are even aware of this game, but it's an action dice system where you have a couple dice that you then portion out throughout your activation for this character to achieve their aims or, action their verbs. So it works a lot like how a squad works in I Ain't Been Shot, Mom, where you kind of have 2 to 4 dice per squad, and then you can spend them on movement or shooting or whichever. And that's kind of how it works here, but it's rooted to the individual. So again, 2 to 4 dice is kind of a common range you'll see, and you'll be able to spend a die on movement, which will get you a dice roll worth of random movement. You'll be able to spend a die or 2 on combat or equivalent. And it's by portioning out your dice in your turn with your activation is how you activate and control your characters. And when you're wounded, you are losing one of your dice. So they are in effect your endurance and HP system as well. What's interesting about these dice is their D10s. It's not a D6 game. It's going to make a little bit of a paradigm shift and rock the 10. And what that does is it gives you a wider range of increments on your die to play with as the designer, but it also gives you a wider range of variance between your rolled outcomes. So we mentioned, or I just did, that it uses random movement. So if you spend one of your D10s as a random move, that's a D10's worth of inches you're covering. So it's not as tight as a D6 of random movement because there's an extra 4 inches you're throwing on the end of that. So it can lead to scenarios where it can be harder to initially. You will learn this in play, of course, because familiarity is the ultimate teacher. But as you go along, you'll start to see like, wait, am I a D10 away from someone? I don't know. Because it's harder to guess that, than the D6, which is a 6-inch move at a maximum, which is sort of an old standard in the wargaming world. But the D10 is a little harder to parse for random movement, but it's very satisfying in that it allows for lots of incremental modification depending on the condition or situation or context of an action or fight.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, some of this is more of a familiarity aspect, but there is a big difference between, especially when regarding movement, running a range between 1 and 10 inches or units, but in this case, I think it's inches.
Yes, it would be inches.
And then 1 to 6. And I remember before we started this episode, I was equating the idea of D6s measured against inches as kind of being like an imperial measurement system or comparable to it.
Yes.
Because if you use 2d6 for movement, the maximum you're going to get is 1 foot. With D10, it's more, I hate to say this, but more metric. But then centimeters make for always such a weird, like it's too granular to use that. But the distance would be more in fitting with that because 10 inches of random movement is quite, like, and that's on 1 die, can be quite far.
Yes.
So some of it's a familiarity thing. And this is not the only game to do this. There's been a big trend in skirmish games particularly, but war games more broadly trying to adopt the D10. And one of the unsung advantages of D6s, and this is a weird thing to say, but the main argument for using D6s that I've seen online is that everybody has them.
Right.
And so they're ubiquitous, they're easy to use. But I would argue that actually in itself creates another element, which is mechanical familiarity with the outcome of a D6. Because they're so ubiquitous, and people use them a lot, there's a greater understanding of what the range of that means on a table size. Now, in the case of like random outcome for, say, an attack or anything like that, I don't think the difference is so pronounced. It depends on how you're using the dice. Pools or total value or add 2 together. But when you include movement or a determination of movement into a D10, it very much changes the dimensions of the table and the movement. So I don't think that this is a fault of this particular game. I don't even think it's necessarily a fault at all.
Yeah.
Because it may, as we said, be a matter of getting used to how those dice behave. But we were having a difficult time determining what that full range of movement would look like when it was executed.
Yeah, in the game I was playing, I had a hard time like looking at the table and being like, okay, I'm going to advance with my soldier here. That's one of the backgrounds you can take. So he had a sword and he was going to run forward and fight a goblin character. But I didn't know if they were going to fall short, if they were going to overrun, how that was going to work. And I wanted to like shimmy up and get close, but I overshot and got right in the goblin's face. And then they were able to poke me with a spear. So it's a little harder to read, but I do think as you play, you'll easily overcome that just through experience. But you will have to develop that experience because our familiarity with the D10 is just not quite as there with the D6. Something to point out about this game that I really like, though, about its use of the D10 is that 7 or higher, 7 up, that's your target number. So that's what you're hitting. It doesn't matter if it's an attack, if it's a search roll, if it's anything. It's a 7 or higher on your D10. And then you'll consider your traits. So you're starting to notice here, there's an absence of attributes or characteristics. Everything's a 7 unless your traits tell you otherwise. And that's where those more granular increments on the D10 are valuable. Some traits might give you a 1, a +2 to your die roll, effectively making your target number lower by 1 or 2 steps. So there's absolutely advantages to taking ideal traits to modify that 7+. But that is fortunately a very consistent and easy to remember target and kind of gives it this like, it's like a 5+ on a D6 kind of, you got like roughly that 1/3 shot. Now, how the game goes on to work is you use something called build points or monster build points. And that's how you assemble your character. That's how you're picking your traits, assigning their qualities. And once you've reached 25 build points, you earn an additional action die. So that's how you're building your characters. It's based on these action dice that come at 25-point increments as your character grows and ascends in power, whether you build them like that to start with for your campaign or a one-off scenario, or you start them as just a peasant with a spear and a buckler, and they build up over time to be a barbarian warlord. Your call. But that would be the basic function of the character growth is these build points and the 25% markers in the sand that give you those action dice. When you have different equipment or weapons, those work like super traits almost, where it does trait-like things, like give you a +1 or a -1, but they'll have other additional factors. And weapons are really the important one here, in my mind, because they incorporate a concept called reach.
Yes.
And this is very interesting. We've seen this in some other skirmish games like Warcry or, a few other titles I can think of. But different weapons will give you a different broadcast range of threat from your base. So if you have a spear, you're like 2-inch threat range as opposed to a 1-inch threat range, as opposed to, a bigger monster who's gargantuan or larger, as they're called. And you might have like a 2-inch reach just inherent to your size as a troll. So that gives this dynamic sense of like different guys can get you at different ranges, and you have to think about how you want to step in on someone, because stepping in under a spear is very dangerous, because if you have to move into someone's threat range to strike because you have a lower reach weapon, you have to make an evade or like a dodge roll to get in under the attack or the potential attack of opportunity that your opponent will make. And if you dodge that, you're in, and then you make your strike. But if you fail that, then they get a free attack of opportunity right on you there to poke you with the spear as you try and come in on them. So the relationship between what weapon you have, what weapon your opponent has, and then also factoring in what action dice you have to spend, because you can only make one attack per turn, but you can put as many dice on it as you have. But you also must remember, when your opponent goes to strike you back, you need dice in the pocket to roll defensively, unless you got resistances to magic or special things. But like, if you're going to go on a full bore offensive, you will leave yourself vulnerable to a counterattack. So it's very interesting in that you need to keep a reserve of action dice in your character, either before they act, to know like, okay, this guy hasn't acted yet, but he'll probably lose a die on a defensive roll because he's in a duel right now. But then he'll get his next die or his next 2 die, depending on his whatever rank they may be. But the interesting point of this is that as you get wounded, like we mentioned at the start, you do lose these action dice. So it is a system of endurance, and you'll see characters that are really dangerous have more action dice, and they really are dangerous because not only are they tougher, they have actions that last longer, and they're more explosive at the start of the game with coming out the gate with 3 or 4 actions. So it did teach me in some regards that more is more in the Consortium. When you have a character that can have extra action dice, that's like really good. But as we saw in our game, when we had wandering monsters arrive, we had those goblins with spears come on us. That reach really made it so it didn't matter that the goblins were weak. It just mattered that they were there. And if you wanted to deal with them, that they could try and stab at you. So that was really interesting. The scenario we ended up playing was a navigate the map from the bottom to the top, south to north, and acquire these items as we go along. It was really fun, but the random monsters really threw a wrench in our plan. And it was our warriors that found the items and were trying to make their way off the board first, when we got ambushed effectively by wandering monsters to our rear, leaving our apothecary and our hunter having to fight them on their own almost. So it was cool the way that the scenario rolled out to create a very unique circumstance that wouldn't have necessarily been a series of optimized choices like some skirmish games boil down to. Like, it is optimal to do this. My next phase, it is optimal to strike in this fashion. In this game, in the Consortium, there's enough variance, variability, random tables, and different outcomes that you're not in a position where you can just make your best choice. Your best choice might be mitigated by all types of considerations that really erode your ability to get everything you want done. And I think an action economy is at the heart of a really good war game.
I really like the mechanics of the action economy mechanics. Excuse me. I thought that was like one of the strongest parts. Once you get your head around it, it's really about making sure that you're not overextending yourself, and that gives you a lot of meaningful play when you're actually dealing with that situation. I think we were only just sort of starting to grasp that as we were getting through the scenario, or as Troy was. I was kind of chiming in and trying things out, but mostly I was watching Troy do it. And it was smooth. That's one of the things I was quite surprised with the smoothness of play and how easy it was to jump into it. I mean, Jay was if anything, Jay was participating more in this because I was trying to do something else. But he really took to how, like, it set up a mission, it laid out a scenario, so long as you were able to set the table properly. And then it felt like you were playing within like round 2, like really playing.
Yeah, by the second turn, we were already making tactical choices. We weren't like staring at a rule book and thinking, okay, what is movement? We were already like, I'm going to move 1d10 to this point, to the edge of this wall. Hopefully I make it. And then I want to shoot my crossbow. And we were like thinking in these terms where, again, there's a lot of variance and a lot of variability, but that doesn't take away the tactical thinking that you still have to apply to deal with these monsters. And we sort of played it more like a solo mode where all three of us were on one side versus me playing the opposition, if you know what I'm trying to say. That's sort of the mode we took for our demo game where we were learning the mechanics. But we learned them quick. We got into it. Mm-hmm. And then we started to see the mistakes of our first 3 rounds. And we were like, okay, I'm getting this now. And I'm getting what I was doing wrong. And then we got shellacked by some goblins.
Yep.
But that's what I liked about it, is because the game showed us how we bit off more than we could chew, just in the way we allocated the resource of our action dice. And it was really satisfying. And our apothecary had bandages, so when our warrior woman with her shield and her scimitar got taken down, the apothecary ran over there and applied a bandage for the heal. So there was like cool moments of interaction between the party members.
A little bit for naught, but yeah, it worked out.
It totally, to just really cut to the chase, we got TPK'd, total party kill at the top.
We got schmucked really bad.
But at no point was it from, we rolled some pretty insane dice for our swings back. Like I'm talking 1s through 3 was basically what we could roll. But there wasn't a sense that the game was out to get us or doing anything untoward or was unbalanced. It was just, in this scenario, there were goblins everywhere, and we were not well suited to fight them. Not that we weren't like equipped with spears and swords and bows. It was just that our guys didn't sleep good the night before, I guess. But it was a really entertaining fight. And what I think really hung well with me was the interplay between needing to use action dice to achieve your goals, but needing to hold them back because if anything bad happens to you, you're going to need it to keep yourself alive.
Yeah. Effectively, it was like an action point system. But the nice thing about it was it wasn't broken down into an obnoxiously granular way. Like there was a very clear, tangible way as far as how many actions you can do and that each one is sort of connected with a role. Oh, another fun thing, Troy, you might want to get into and explain, but like there's no stats in the game.
Yeah. Like there's no characteristics or ability scores. You're using traits and keywords. So there are heroic traits that define your hero, your player character, who is, when you're playing in party mode, sort of the POV. And the other heroes are called your brothers in arms. And these people can get traits and heroic abilities and also flaws that will change and become the modifiers to that core 7-up dice roll we talked about. And that's the texturing that's going to bring your character to life. And then at the end of a scenario, at the end of a mission, you're going to roll on serious events tables, serious injury tables. And that'll also have the ability to impart traits or kill your character or make them undead or do, honestly, quite a wide range of things to your character, more so than your arm is broken for 2 turns. It's kind of crazy what can happen to a character who ends a fight down or out of action. When a character is, quote, slain, they're not. They're knocked onto their side until someone can tag them up and provide healing. Or at the start of every turn, you roll a d10. On an outcome of 1, well, they are slain or they're out of action, so they pass out. On an outcome of 10, they hop to their feet. 2 through 9, nothing so far. They're still down. Each turn thereafter, that fail number increases by 1. So if it's been 2 turns you're out of action or you're down, it means a 1 or a 2 on your dice roll will now take you out of action. And 1 to 3 on the 3rd turn, etc. So it gets increasingly dangerous. So you really want to be careful and try and recover your downed fighters. Because someone can free attack, coup de grace, right? Just knock them out, subdue them as it's referred to. But alternatively, if you're still down and you have to roll on that serious injuries table, like your guy can lose an eye, they can take all types of trait penalties. There's even good ones if you roll really high, but it's risky. And there are cases where you can have to roll twice on the serious injury table and take the worst result. And that can really leave your character in the lurch. So you really have to be careful about overcommitting and leaving yourself hanging because there are consequences. And because it's an adventure war game and you're sort of meant to play with a reoccurring cast of characters, it is something you really got to pay attention to because you don't want to invest yourself in this cool barbarian lord guy who's so awesome. And then you just get greedy with his actions and leave him to get smoked. And then they acquire some negative traits that they don't align with your vision for this character's future. They talk about a character in the rule book called Cambion, who is a cautionary tale, we'll say. So there are lessons in the book about like, pushing it and going as far as you can. But I think the action economy, the action dice, and the way in which you interact with the core mechanics of the game are so well thought out, really satisfying, and strike me as something that would translate as a skirmish engine to other settings. It doesn't have to be fantasy. Like you could do this in sci-fi. You could do this in, more of like an Age of Sail, black powdery, swashbuckling world. I mean, arguably the Consortium already is that to some extent, but there's a lot you can do with the basic engine of this game that I found very satisfying.
There's room for refinement, but I think that it works well enough that it could just be this. I'd be happy with it. I think, the D10 thing is a bit of an adjustment if you're not used to it, but ultimately it doesn't ruin the experience. So
by no means, it's used well in this example. I think the D10 works for this game. Like we've talked about with the movements, it can be hard to parse sometimes where that's going to end up, but I really think the D10 was a smart choice. It doesn't feel like a contrarian move just to have an alternative dice type. You know what I mean?
I've seen it in other examples where it feels like it's done for the sake of not being a D6, and probably because a D10 is familiar to some degree, though, again, if you know anything about the history of dice, you'll know it's like the new die, the novelty die.
The new kid on the block, yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love D10s. Pretty much every RPG that is my favorite is a D100 system for some reason or another. But yeah, used in this way, I think it works, like in this particular game. And it certainly, I've seen it work far less considerately in other examples, if that makes sense.
It does.
I've seen more awkward executions where it feels like you're right. It's just kind of like it's in there because nobody does that. And that's not a good reason to do that because you think changing the die variants would not have that much of an effect, but arguably, I think it has way more of an effect than people might expect.
Yes.
As I said, especially regarding like movement on a table.
And that's something that's a little bit challenging is to know the movement rates, but we talked about that and how you'll learn that. And that's part of any game is learning the tolerances of your moves. Like, how risky can I get? How fast can I really run? And that's part of any game experience. Now to move on to more about like not how the game plays in a moment to moment, but how do you interact with the game between sessions? Because a lot of war games, they don't have that. There isn't a between session. There is a void where everyone goes inert until the next battle. And then, we're alive again. Let's battle. But in this game, there is downtime activities. There is shopping. There are events, travel. So when you do a mission, you acquire what's called a proof of completion. That's an item that goes in the hero or the MVP's bag. The MVP, or the Gold Star Award, as it's kind of anachronistically called, is awarded to the player and or monster that achieves the most in a game, as voted by the party. And they are the one that has to carry, unless you're playing the standard party mode with a dedicated hero, the proof of completion. So the head of the slain orc, or the letter from the Lord that you achieved your aim, or whatever, right? And then you have to bring that home. But you do have to roll for random events for the number of days of travel required, and the intensity of the mission that you just completed will infect its reward, but will additionally make it a longer journey home. Therefore, more random event rolls to see what happens to you. And you can even lose your proof of completion from your inventory, which means you fail the mission. So there's a little bit of a risk, taking on these higher grade missions, so to speak, because you'll get a big payout, but you have to walk longer, which is risky in its own right. And when you get back, if you've lost it, well, you have truly lost it and you won't be getting any benefits. Now, the way a mission selection works is you'll have different guilds. These are the Consortium is sort of the great governing institution, but there are the guilds. There are guilds for different things. They'll have you go out to reclaim lost settlements, clear the wilderness of threats, fight dangers, or confront monsters, like different things of different themes. But you'll pick which guilds you want to work on. You'll roll on their mission table, and you'll complete that type of a mission for the guild, earning reputation for that specific faction. What the reputation does is it enables you to have better gear, and certain items can be, or artifacts are very controlled by the Consortium. If you have items that are greater than an equivalent ranking that you have, so this can be an item that's rated as worth something higher than your highest guild reputation, the Consortium might take it from you and say, you're not authorized to carry that laser staff. Give me that. And they'll yank it out of your hand. But if you've demonstrated enough, loyalty to a faction, you yourself will be able to hold on to that and be like, nope, I'm good with this guild and I'm helping them. So I'm keeping my laser staff. So there's a lot of interest there. And in this downtime, between, after you roll, you get your mission assignment, you complete your mission, you travel home, you now have some choices and some role play opportunity with your party. They recommend 10 to 15 minutes of just downtime role play between player characters. If it's just you soloing, you can take notes. You can write like, these two guys don't get along, whatever you want. But if you're playing at the table, it's kind of recommended that you have a conversation in character. Talk about the beef stew you're eating or whatever.
It's an interesting prompting.
Do you think people do it, though?
I mean, obviously, because it's a tabletop game. If you don't want to, you don't have to.
That's true.
In some situations where you're soloing, you're just sort of deciding what happens. So it's very contextual to how you play the game. I'm going to back it up a little bit and talk about the mechanics between, like the downtime mechanics and the random encounter, or the random, not so much encounters, but like situations that happen between missions. You'll sometimes see these in RPGs, like a system for doing this. And there's some debate as to whether that's a good thing or not, or whether you should do that more loosely. I kind of like that it gives a mechanical structure so that it's easy to move through to the next thing if you want to. And if you want to play it out, you can just elaborate on what happens. Probably a bit of both is good. But in the case of a game where you have these little skirmish squads, and it goes into a kind of war game that's very mission-based, those little inter-event situations that occur, or systems for like acquiring new missions or anything like that, actually they work a lot better in this type of a game.
That's good feedback.
I had less of an issue with it here than I would in an RPG, where sometimes I'm like, I generally like this, but sometimes it feels too mechanical. But in a game that is more focused around the mechanical aspect of combat being the focal point of it, and then the RPG being supplementary to that, it works better because it gets you through those things and it gives you stuff that's unexpected, which is especially preferable if you're playing solo or GM-less.
Absolutely.
As to the role-playing moment requests, I didn't find those did as much for the same reason that the downtime events worked. Because it felt too RPG-ish for the type of game that it was, and I don't know that I always feel the need to enforce that. Sometimes it's good if it's that sort of a game, or depending on how you're managing your players, if you're a GM. I often find role-play moments shouldn't necessarily be dictated by the rules. That's, I know some people will differ on that, but I think that that's something that's more about the GM's coaching of what is happening in the game. Like one of the best ones, and actually Seth Sorokowski.
Oh, yeah.
So he had a recent video talking about questions that help move roleplay forward. And one of the best ones in that was the idea of make sure to ask questions was the trick, because that, to me, is the best advice for role-playing game, for players and for GMs.
Yes.
Because you don't know what's really going on unless you actually exchange information in the form of questions rather than making assumptions. But one of the ones that I really liked about that video was the question, and not all the time, but at pivotal moments, how does that make your character feel?
That's interesting.
That was like, oh yeah, that is, and I've done that before without realizing that that's something to keep in your tool belt, but it brings intentionality back to the game. However, I don't think that should go beyond just the skill of the GM. I don't think that that's necessarily something that has to be codified into mechanics, because as much as it adds something, my concern about making it part of the rules is that it makes the game feel stilted and unnatural or undynamic, when it's something that, if you're playing a game with a GM, that they should prompt out of you as like the role of a director might in a scene.
Yes.
Not because the script necessarily asks for it, but because that's what the GM thinks would be most interesting at this point.
Yeah.
That was how I felt about those sort of prompted role-playing moments. And again, because it's tabletop, you can just take it as advice rather than as a rote method.
Yes.
But I'm pretty suspect of when there's a differentiation between role-playing rules and role-playing culture, if that makes sense. There's some things that are more like how to be effective at the table and get the most out of the game, depending on whether you're a player or a games master. And then there's something that makes a good game mechanically, the rules. And I think that there's a lot of times where I see that, and it's a personal preference thing to some degree, but sometimes I feel that, it's weird to say, but like player agency sometimes gets removed by these very like codified, like we were talking about how like board game rules don't always work in role-playing games because they operate with a lower fidelity than the open-endedness of role-playing mechanics. And so it feels very prescriptive when it comes to things like actions. And I don't think that this crosses that line, but there's some worry that I have where it's coming close to that.
Some of the other things that the downtime it has that you can also do is it's still role-playish, but it's like adding characters to your party in the form of hirelings. So that could be done as mechanically as you like, oh, I go to the tavern and I roll a d10. Let's see my search roll for hirelings, right? But it could also be very much a role-play opportunity at the table as well. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the themes and setting, because the theme is one set in a new world of colonial exploration. And there are dangers in this world. You have access to your traditional suite of roleplay weapons, but also black powder and a range of alchemical weapons as well that can be defined as hurlants, like magical concoctions and bombs you can throw at stuff.
Your grenade potions, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So that's kind of what you're going to be composed of. And then you're going to go out in the world and you're going to confront monsters. They could be bosses. They could be minions. They can be wandering monsters that spawn on table edges. They could come from monster layers. Or they could be bespoke boss characters that you're going to have to search for on the map and have them spawn to be able to confront. So there are a variety of different foes. Thematically, because the game only gives you the stat lines in the bestiary, there are no real written adversaries for you. There's no statement that, oh, we're fighting orcs today. It's really anything that you have the models for. So this game can take a lot of different, we said, like, what are the thematics of this game? In some ways, that is also up to you with what you bring to the table. So if you feel that you want to thematically have it be battling against orcs, you could do that. If you wanted to battle against the undead, that's absolutely possible. If you wanted to battle against other, humanoids, whether they be other members of a different community or, hostile travelers from a different time, it could be anything. And you can make that your opposition using the models you have available. There are, of course, we've said it a few times, some profiles you can download. But part of the fun of a game like this is playing designer and looking at the models on your shelf. We've talked about this before with stuff like Laser Storm, when it was really fun to look at my Epic collection and think like, that's a heavy laser. That's a cyclonic missile launcher. That was a blast. And this game will do the same thing with your fantasy skirmish collection, where you're looking at your 28s or your 15s. I should say this. It is a 28 mil game on a 4x4 in inches, but you can play 15 on a 2x2 in centimeters just as well. I mean, if you like playing in centimeters, I don't. I feel like it's too small an increment. And if you bump the table, someone gets a free move. And I just think inches are easier to work with. But that's the thing you can absolutely do if you prefer your 15 mil fantasy. And 15 mil is great. I love 15 mil. But when it comes to rubber meeting road with the setting and the gameplay and the mechanics and the somewhat more lethal depiction of the setting, where it's bleaker and more deadly and dangerous, align really well. There is sort of the tonal dissonance of some of this, for lack of a better term, more humorous or silly moments that can fit in. But I think you'd have to make that fit in based on your choices at the table with the models you're including. Like if you have a bunch of robed night goblins running around being silly, like maybe that's going to work. But it did feel to us that wasn't exactly the optimal tone for this game, because at its heart, it's hard. Like we got total party killed. We made mistakes and we earned that, but it didn't give us a freebie, even on an easier difficulty. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Lore-wise, I think that was the hardest part that I had grasping. And again, it wasn't the concept or any of like the particular things. It was more of the specific execution in the writing. I was looking for more of a cohesive voice in the way that it was written. The rules are very clearly described.
Yep.
But there's a big difference between instructive writing and creative writing. Again, it doesn't break the game. The game is mainly based around the rules. But if I were to make any suggestion to the creators, it would be to try to focus on just a few elements and make those really stick out. Because I wasn't really getting, this is like the central theme of the game. The theme less so, but the tone was more of the thing. It was, now again, people have many opinions about this. But Troy, you've seen Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom.
Okay, yes.
So do you know the tonal issues with that movie?
I would say I do. I am familiar with that from my film school background.
Yeah, so that felt like something that's close to what I feel was going on here. And that is a eminently watchable movie. Very fun to watch. But there are these moments where it shifts between very dark and very comedic in a way that doesn't feel integrated. It's like you're watching two movies with the same plot in the same movie. To me, that's really the only thing I have to say. Everything else here looks great. It's really professional. I really appreciate the integration of that narrative in whatever state it's in with the rules, and also the fact that it can easily be separated out from that.
Yeah, if you wanted to play a more like traditional Tolkien fantasy, this would not even blink as you made that transition.
Yeah, like it's not a toolbox game. It definitely fits in its own context, but you can unpack it enough that it sort of worked the same way. It's a recommend, 100%.
Yeah, for me too, dog.
Yeah, if you're looking for something to just throw down on the table and get into really quickly, I mean, obviously someone's going to have to sit there and read the rules and get familiar with that. Oh, that was one other thing. It'd be nice to have a little bit more of for the combat section. It'd be nice to have a nice, clear breakdown with, we'll call it troubleshooting sections or comments on it about the breakdown, the moment-to-moment breakdown of combat. Because I found we were flipping around looking for things a lot.
Yes.
And most of those things we found pretty quickly, but there was a few edge cases where we were like, oh, that feels like that should be like packed together on this page, or at least a reference with a page number would be easier. Sometimes navigating the book when it came to turn order got a little, and like phases got a little bit weird, but I don't think it was anything that I thought, like, I've seen that issue in a lot of other games, so that's not like a big thing.
And then when you got to the right page, the page was laid out incredibly well and you found what you needed. But that was something we did find, and I think it is worth mentioning. And I would say here, as we think more about what this game can do for you as a player, it is not a toolbox, as it comes with its own setting, but it is a vehicle to experience an RPG campaign where you have a load of authorship. Whether or not you're the GM or not, it's not, I mean, in other games, you may have what are called story points that you can spend to make a story choice in this turn. In this game, it's all story points. You are the author. Do what you want. Roll on the tables you want to roll on. Like, it does tell you when to make a travel roll, and how many days of travel this hard mission equates to. But there's a lot of this flexibility and freeform authorship that comes with this game. It feels almost like, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to be in this much control? And that's kind of the best part.
It has a lot of stuff that if it were a full-blown RPG, I would not like it. But because it is this kind of party-based skirmish game, those mechanics, like there not being core stats, because I typically like a lot of granularity in my RPGs. Again, personal preference. But with this kind of game where you're controlling a bunch of like separate characters as a group in a more Mordheim, Necromunda kind of thing, the idea of them being made up of these little character traits rather than, say, core stats, and that those traits are part of, like, you know, you get flaws and all these other things that will happen to your character, really work in this game that has a little bit less of a focus on one character resolution. And I'd actually really like to see other skirmish games take that on, possibly even war games.
I think it's really clever. The use of the traits, the use of the action dice, like everything here that's been put together feels like it's well considered. It's going to play well regardless of how many hours you're putting into it. Like, you're not going to run into this ceiling with this game, you know, where it's like, oh, okay, this is the natural endpoint conclusion, because you just make a character of a new style, make a new PC, make a new monster. Like, the components are here for you to do a wide variety of things with little consideration for them running out of value, you know? And there are free supplements. There's a Facebook group community, and there's even additional like expansions. So if you want to lock in on a skirmish game and spend some time on it, but without feeling like you have to join some like corporate ecosystem or buy specific models, this is a really good game to jump in on. You can use what you have. You can make stats for them. You can play it as a one-off, or even better, as part of a persistent little campaign. And depending on your approach or tonal alignment, you can change the setting to be what you want it to be as easily as anything else.
For the type of game that it is, it's well supported. And yeah, we'll throw links, at least on the YouTube channel, into...
Yes, we'll link this one up on the vault so everyone can check this one out for sure.
Yep, and the Facebook group, we'll try to get all of that.
Oh, great point. Yes, I'll get that there.
Yeah, because I think that's it's important. The best way to understand a game like this is to really get familiar with the other people that like it, because they're probably going to do a better job if they like it, and you might be into it. They're going to do a better job than we are from just going through it and trying it out. You know, because as it is, that's where we're at with this channel.
Exactly.
But yeah, absolutely, go look at what they're doing and really dive into it. You know, if you think this is for you, and I certainly think it's fun enough to try.
Don't miss your opportunity with this one, because it is something lightweight that provides a lot of fun. So you don't need a big bank account to play this game. You don't need a lot of anything, you know, like 7 guys versus 5 guys, you know, 7 monsters versus 5 party members. That's enough. That'll get you started.
Any other final thoughts?
Just in general, I wanted to shout out our D.I.Y community and say thank you very much to both Brandy and Julio for submitting their game to us. And I wanted to open the invitation to anyone else who has a war game, a role-playing game, a scenario, a module, or even if you were writing some broad, big house rules to take a historical setting and change it. Like if you were taking sharp practice and you wanted to move it into the Franco-Prussian Wars, heck, let us know. We would be very interested in looking at more of the D.I.Y community.
Oh, yeah.
We have nothing but respect for the people that put themselves out there, that put the work in. I mean, it's not easy. Like, it's easy to write words down, but it's not easy to write clever ones down and to get them into other people's hands.
Yeah, 100%.
So nothing but respect to the community that provided us with this game. Julio, Brandy, shout outs to you. I would also like to say that our next episode is a Beyond the Book, and we're doing arts and crafts. We're talking about painting. We're talking about terrain building, basing. All that goes into making our tables look nice when we're playing a miniatures game or a role-playing game that's using models. So we're going to go deep on that. Max, of course, is our artist on our podcast and does all of our awesome illustrations. And I've just been painting models forever. So
I've been outed as an artist.
Aha! But like, so we'll have some perspectives, and we'll let everyone know what we think about the process and, you know, the pros and cons. But I'm really excited to dive in on that because that's very much my wheelhouse, and I've recently got back into painting in a big way, so I have lots to say.
Yeah, and as it goes for all of the DIY episodes, if we didn't think it was good, we wouldn't have brought it up.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. When we do a DIY, we only cover, like, when you submit it to us, we talk to you, and then we make sure that it's a fit for us and for you. And we cover it when we feel that it's a fit and that it's something we want to recommend. It doesn't mean that it's like, you know, beyond criticism or something, but it means that we're there to support it and make sure it gets in the hands of people who would like it. So when it comes to a game like the Consortium here, it has our recommendation for play, and I would definitely say people should give it a look.
And as far as episodes going forward, we're trying to schedule how we do those DIY episodes so that we're trying to give them as much attention as possible. So that you might not see as many of them, but they are in the pipeline right now, and we're really happy for the response that we've gotten, and we hope to see a lot more of them. So thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. Till next time, everyone, and happy gaming.
Happy gaming.
We hope you enjoyed delving into today's episode. A big thanks to all of you out there for joining us. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Tales and Tactics Podcast, or on all popular podcast platforms. Join us again on the next exciting episode of Tales and Tactics.